live right.
Thank you all for being with us here this evening. Merci à toutes et à tous d'être ici avec nous ce soir. My name is Amber Burson. I'm the director at the Visual Arts Center at the home of the McClure Gallery. And this evening, we have the privilege of experiencing a guided tour by artist Nikki McClure. By Nikki Middlemiss, the McClure Gallery. I know where we are. Whose series 𝙀𝙚𝙀𝙚 is currently on view at the McClure Gallery. So I'd like to start by acknowledging that the Visual Arts Center is located on unceded Indigenous land. The 𝙀𝙚𝙀𝙚 Nation is recognized as the custodians of the lands and waters on which we gather today, either virtually or in person. 𝙀𝙀𝙀𝙚, Muniang, or Montreal is historically known as the gathering place for many First Nations, and today it's the home to the continued presence of many Indigenous peoples. Nous respectons les liens continus avec le passé, le présent et l'avenir dans nos relations avec les peuples autochtones et autres au sein de la communauté de Montréal. When I think about my relationship to a land acknowledgement, I think it's really important to connect it directly to something that's happening in the present. And so in that spirit, I'd like to take a moment for us all to think about the impact of logging on the people and landscape of BC as a result of Canada's continual refusal to honor treaties and to decolonize. This has a real life consequence for community, and it's from that place of working together that we'll hopefully find a way out of this current ecological disaster. A reminder that the Wet'suwet'en leadership are currently defending under constant threat of forced eviction the headwaters of their river from destruction, and we know that it's a crucial time to be behind them. So now, I'd like to take a moment to introduce Nikki Middlemiss. Nikki received a bachelor's degree in visual arts from the University of Ottawa in 1999 and has lived in Montreal since 2000. Her art has since been exhibited in galleries and artist-run centers across Canada, including in Montreal at the Centre des Arts Actuels Skol, Galerie B-312, and the Maisons de la Culture Network. This fall, Nikki completed an artwork for a research project led by Concordia professor and artist Kathleen Vaughn, who also recently exhibited at the McClure Gallery. The project, which will be launched in 2022, seeks to provide arts experiences that are linked to the St. Lawrence River ecosystem and to celebrate the St. Lawrence River as a connective and generative force. Finally, Nikki will also exhibit the body of work in this show, 𝙀𝙀𝙀𝙀, again at the Art Gallery of Regina in March 2022. Maintenant, j'invite Nikki à nous faire une visite guidée de son exposition. La présentation sera en anglais, mais vous êtes toujours invité à nous poser des questions en français dans le chat de Facebook Live. The presentation will be in English, but feel free to send your questions in English or French using the Facebook Live chat. Welcome, Nikki.
Thanks, Amber. Thanks very much. Thank you as well for doing this with me. I'm very happy to be doing this talk with you tonight. Oui, je voulais juste dire que oui, absolument, je suis aussi disponible pour les questions en français. Donc, si quelqu'un a une question en français ou en anglais, je pense que ça va être à la fin de la présentation. So I am just going to, I guess what I'm going to do in this talk is I'm going to just start by showing a few images of the exhibition that Margarita at the gallery took for me. Thank you. Just to give everybody an idea of what is up right now. And then I'm going to move into talking a little bit about a few of the earlier pieces that I have done that have been kind of keys, I suppose, to what has happened in the 𝙀𝙀𝙀𝙀 series that I'm exhibiting here. And then I was going to wrap up by talking a little bit about the influences on my practice and a bit about where my ideas come from. So I'm just going to need a minute while I share my screen here. Which is taking a little bit longer than I might like. Just 1 minute. Okay, there we go. Okay, is that good, Amber?
Yes,
I'm
it's good.
assuming
Yes,
yes. Okay,
perfect.
good.
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Sorry.
No problem at all. So yes, these are some of the images of the exhibition 𝙀𝙀𝙀𝙀 that will be up until December 24th. I'm just going to go through these, as I said, just to give everybody an idea of the work that's in the gallery right now. Okay. So I guess to speak a little bit about my practice in general, these are all drawings on tracing paper, and my practice is based in drawing. I work with other mediums. I work quite a bit in photography and have done some video recently, but really drawing is at the core of my practice, and particularly the line. So I'm always very interested in the repetition of the line and how you can repeat the same line over and over again until it transforms into something else. Transformation is another key in my work. I'm really motivated by working in the studio with my materials, mostly art materials, but also some regular household materials. And I'm really enjoy being surprised by what they do that I wouldn't expect, how they interact differently than I would think, how I can set out with an idea that I want to work on and find that my materials are doing something completely different that is more interesting than what I had in mind. So with that, I guess I'm going to just move from these exhibition shots to, this is a drawing that I did from a series that I started almost 10 years ago called the Diffraction Series. And this is really where my practice and especially my practice's relationship to drawing changed around this time when I started becoming very interested in the process of drawing, what it means to really be moving your hand along a paper, what physically happens to our bodies when we work on art, two-dimensional art in my case, and also what happens to our minds as we work. So when I started this, I was doing nothing in terms of making art other than just trying to fill a page with hand-drawn lines. So I was working these pieces on sheets of Mylar in my studio. And I'm not sure everybody would be familiar with Mylar, but basically it's a very thin polyester film that is semi-transparent, very smooth surface. And so I was working basically smaller pieces, about 1.5 by 2 feet or something on tabletop. And I was just constantly repeating hand-drawn horizontal lines across the surface. And it was just flying along so easily because the Mylar is so smooth and I was working with marker. So once I had filled that page with lines, I would just turn the page in another direction and keep going. And eventually when you do this, you end up with the grid. And so at the time that I drawn a grid, I was like, okay, well, what am I going to do next? And that's, I guess, where transformation comes in, is I was interested in picking away and sort of deteriorating the grid so that it would still be there, but it would be different and changed. And so one of the ways that I did it in this series is I would end up spraying the surface of the Mylar with some rubbing alcohol, and the marker would run a little bit and then I would draw over it again. And that's what I've done here. This is another piece from the series. Here I was using the back of or the other side, I suppose, of the Mylar to work and put some paint and roll it around with a rolling pin. So really making use of the transparent qualities of the Mylar. This last one here is very subtle and difficult to see, which isn't unusual with my work, but I'm going to go right to the detail of it right now. And with this one, I was basically sprinkling salt on the table I was working on and putting the drawing over top. And then I just started taking sanding paper and sanding away at the surface of the drawing. So those little, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but the tiny points in the surface are actually tiny holes in the drawing. And then I would draw back over top of it. So that was the Diffraction series. Then I got interested in tracing paper. So my interest in tracing paper does go back a few years. This is an image of a show that I had at the Kelowna Art Gallery in 2017. And it's for a project of mine that was called Scaffolding for Minutia. And this was the first work that I did on tracing paper. And tracing paper has many of the characteristics of Mylar, being semi-transparent and quite smooth thin surface. But it also was available in 4-foot wide rolls. So I was really able to scale up with this work. Some of these I had to work on with a ladder and then carefully turning the paper as I worked. And so to build up these drawings, I was, again, using straight lines. But in this case, I was actually using an eyedropper to drip the paint onto the surface of the tracing paper. And then, again, I would turn the page and build up a grid structure in this case. However, it's pretty evident that I didn't have the same level of control that I usually would when working, that I had previously when I was working with marker and Mylar on the table. So also something that happened in this series, particularly with this piece, is I started using still straight lines, but I started plotting them out on the diagonals so that they ended up, in this case, sort of funneling, creating a funnel or spiral effect. And this is something that I have come back to in the Elevate series, and I'll talk about in a minute. And this is also from the Scaffolding Minutia series. The piece on the left for me, anyways, this is the detail of it, is actually a piece that was one of the last pieces that I completed. And I became really interested in what happened to that part of the paper at the top where I hadn't put any paint on. And basically it was warping somewhat uncontrollably and creasing, and you can't roll it up and stuff. But I was just really like, oh, this is the nature of the paper. This is actually what it does. And I would be interested in working more with leaving more of the surface bare and not covering it with lines or paint or something. So that's a bit of background. Quick tour through, I guess, about 10 years of work. This is an image that is in the Elevate series right now. So it's in the show, and I thought that this would be a good image to start with to talk about what changed when I started working on the drawings that are in the Elevate show right now. So one of the things is I'm still repeating the line, but in this case, I felt like I had for the time done enough with the grid and the straight line, and I wanted to see what would happen if I started working with a curved line. So all of the pieces in the exhibition are made up of the repetition of the same curved line. It's not necessarily the same curved line from image to image, but basically, again, if you can see my cursor, that sort of line right there is repeated throughout this work. It's sometimes flipped over, it's sometimes mirrored. But yeah, I was very intent on repeating a curved line in order to build these up. And I'm gonna just flip. This is a page from my sketchbook from, yes, 2.5 years ago or so when I started doing this work. And this shows how I was interested in that sort of spiral or funnel work that I had done with the Scaffolding for Minutia, and how I wanted to think a little bit more carefully about where I was putting my lines, whereas before I'd been working quite automatically by just dripping repeated straight lines. So I guess I would say maybe illustrating a little bit more here. And I was just trying out different configurations that I could use, the curved line positioned somewhat mathematically to become a spiral form. So I ended up doing this and trying it, and I ended up with drawings that I felt were a little bit too rigid and formulaic. So I would eventually realize I was working that I had to actually take away lines and move them to where they didn't belong. And there was a sort of intuitive process that would go along with that. So this is another of the images that is in the show right now. And in this case, I wasn't interested in holding on to this idea of a spiral form at all. I just wanted to stack these curved lines. And I wanted to talk a little bit more about this image, as it is in other ways, I guess, representative of some of the things that I was trying to do in this exhibition, or do differently from the work that I had done previously. So I guess one of the things that I noticed is that working with a curved line is different from a straight line. It has energy and movement. And so I found that really whereas I had been working mostly with grids before, they are rather stoic and they present themselves comfortably to you. I felt that the lines that are in this series of work are really pushing to the edge of the paper, that they're moving, that there's a different energy to these works than what I'd done previously. So I guess when I was thinking about a title for the exhibition and for the series, it was clear to me that it had to be a verb, that it was elevate. So yeah, so it's been interesting to start learning about how working with curved lines is different and how I could potentially exploit that. Also, I guess what's important about this work is how it's made as well. And I'm just going to go actually to the detail here, which is a detail of the image taken on its side so you can see a little bit better. But basically, I realized that something had changed in the way that I was using lines in this work that was in addition to the fact that I was using curved rather than straight lines. In the works that I've shown previously, the diffractions and scaffolding for minutiae, basically I was creating those drawings by piling lines onto the surface and covering the surface with lines. And these works in the exhibition are made actually by masking out lines on the surface of the tracing paper. So taking painter's tape and cutting it out and putting the painter's tape where I wanted the line to be. And then what I would do is take spray paint and spray the entire surface of the drawing, and it would be wet. So then it would wrinkle and crinkle and crease around those pieces of tape. And when I removed the tape, I was left with these basically white lines that you're seeing now, which is just the raw tracing paper. It's so in this case, I'm actually using what we would consider the background to define the lines or to set them out on the page. And the lines are the negative, or they're just what's left over after the process of making the drawing. So it's this idea of the negation of the line that I'll get back to in a minute or two. So I guess the other thing I wanted to just mention with these works, and again, my cursor here, is that there are these little fissure-like lines that are appearing as well in the drawings. And these are creases in the paper as a result of the process. So you end up with these really organic fine lines and based on shadows that are sort of competing with the more geometric and structured lines. So yeah, I guess this is about the time where I will talk a little bit more. I've talked a bit about how I make these works, but also a little bit about what I'm thinking about and what my concerns are when I'm making these pieces. And sometimes it isn't apparent to me what it is that I'm getting at or what has influenced me until after I've finished a body of work, or sometimes in the middle of it. But I guess I just wanted to talk about, like, I'm an artist who works non-representationally. I've never been very interested in drawing or illustrating or representing something that exists in the world already. So I think that the assumption sometimes is with artists who do abstract or non-representational work that the work sometimes just gets made at arm's length from the artist, and that there really isn't a lot of their own personality or experience that goes into that. And certainly in my case, that isn't true. And I'm becoming very interested in how what I think about and what I actually live does actually come out in the studio work that I do. So an example of that would be in the first drawings that I was showing, the Diffraction Series. I was talking about how I was in the studio just wanting to draw lines. That's all I was wanting to do. And for me, it was a very calming process to build up these drawings just on autopilot, basically repeating these lines. And I think that there is a sort of meditative quality that remains in those finished works that is probably based on the experience that I was having in making them. Also with that series, that was around the time that I was starting to spend a lot more time in nature, mostly in Quebec, in all seasons, but doing a lot more hiking and skiing. And I know that the patterns of nature that I was observing, as well as just things like shifting weather and seasonal changes, were coming through in those works in terms of palette and placement of marks. So that's an example really of what I was sort of living in my body, but also seeing, and how that influenced some of the work in that project. Another big influence on my practice has always been architecture. And in that sense, I'm maybe should even more say built environment, the ordinary cityscape, ordinary for me, I live in the city, cityscape that we observe every day. For me, the sort of dilapidated Montreal triplex is really endlessly inspiring, where you can never find anything that's a 90-degree angle. So I guess when I refer to architecture, it's more that I have in mind, what we see on a day-to-day basis, the sort of mishmash of what what we come across in the city. And I know that there are influences, those sort of influences that do come up a bit in this exhibition as well. So lastly, I was going to talk a little bit more personally about one thing that I have noticed that is probably pivotal for me, related to this idea of the negative line that had come up when I was doing this work. And I guess a lot of the work that is in the exhibition was made in 2020, so really during the first time of COVID, which for me was certainly a different life than what I had been doing before. Lots more time spent at home, lots more time for reflection, like many of us, a heightened anxiety. And I realized after a while that the sort of headspace I was in terms of concerns, that it was less for me about general concerns around the COVID virus, but more a deepening of the ecological and environmental concerns that have been on my mind for years. So that was going on. And then I started to notice as I worked on this Elevate series, okay, I'm taking the line out of the drawing, I'm negating it. I was also at the same time, this is one of my sort of, I guess you could say, lockdown projects, but I did some drawings in which I was actually burning the line into the surface of some vellum paper. So I realized those are two examples, and there are others where I was doing things like unweaving fabric and trying to fade lines into paper with sunlight, that I'd become interested in trying to work from the negative rather than piling on the lines that I had been doing, I guess, before. And I realized that this might be my sort of subconscious attempt to tread with a light footprint in my studio-based practice. And for me, that's an interesting concept. Also coupled with my more and more tendency to work with very fragile surfaces. What am I doing here? What am I thinking about? And I certainly wouldn't want to say that the Elevate drawing is, that the Elevate series or whatever is about climate change, for instance, but I just think that it is interesting to consider what artists are living and experiencing, or what is on our minds or happening to our bodies even, and how that does come out in work that isn't necessarily representational or illustrative. So yeah, for me, when I think about where to go next, I'm interested in exploring this idea of the negated line and how I could take that further. So I think that's all that I have formally prepared. I stopped the share. There you are, Amber.
Thanks, Nikki. That was really great. It was really nice to learn more about your work. If anybody does have a question, feel free to type it in. In the meantime, I have some questions for you. So sure. I think I'd start with, in our correspondence about this project, you talked about treading lightly in your practice.
Yeah.
I'd love to know what that means beyond, well, in an environmental context, but also what it means beyond an environmental practice, because you're using materials, like you said, that have an environmental impact, but you're working with concepts of like removal and lowering your material impact.
Yeah, I should specify that I don't think that anything that I have done and what I have just shown is actually removing any environmental impact. I'm still working with spray paint or whatever. I'm aware of that. It is problematic for me. It's something that I do question a lot, like, what are my responsibilities in this? But I think there's one of the things I did notice during the time of COVID, as I was spending some time like listening to these sort of talks, artist talks online and stuff, is really that artists were talking a lot about the same sort of concerns that I was having, and also struggling really with what do I do with a materials-based practice? What do I do with things like traveling for art? And nobody's really having an answer to that aligns with their objectives to continue making the work that they do. And so I think this isn't something that is unique to the arts. I think people in all different sectors are having these sort of crises right now about, how to reconcile what we're doing for work, basically, or what we love to do with the impact that it's actually having. So I think for me, really what is interesting is that I'm sort of recognizing where this might come from, and yeah, I continue to think about the implications of a materials-based practice, but I haven't stopped working in my studio. I guess that's it.
Well, I'm very glad for that. Please
Yeah.
don't stop. I guess something that I'm also curious about is, and you talked a bit about, the endless inspiration of the Montreal triplex and thinking about architecture and also the materials you use, the mylar, the tracing paper, the way that you're creating within your sketchbook and then outside of it, some of it makes me think about a larger architecture practice and relationship to architecture. And I'm wondering if you could speak more to that, if indeed there is a relationship.
Okay. Yeah, I have often wondered if it's architecture or so much my surroundings that is really what it is that interests me. Every day I go out and see the Montreal city scene or whatever. As I said, when I started spending more time in nature, then that was coming out in my practice too. But I often do wonder if this sort of architecture is something that I've always been naturally attracted to. It's part of the reason why I came to Montreal and have stayed here. But the constant repetition of it is somehow being drilled in and does come out in other ways. I mean, I've been interested always in architectural history, but I have a hard time getting into architecture as sort of a, certainly the influence is not the academic field of architecture and studying models and stuff like that. When I talk about the built environment, what I am often really interested in is places and spaces that people have lived in for years and years, and basically the transformation of those spaces. Yeah. So that's a little bit on that front.
Thank you.
Yeah.
No, that's great. And then maybe like a final question from me is, where do you think these works fall into a larger history of abstraction and minimalism? And then you and I were talking a bit before, but I think that what abstraction is in Quebec is very widely known and received. We think about the 𝙀𝙚𝙀𝙚, and when I look at these works, I also think about 𝙀𝙀𝙀𝙀, especially the works about snow. So what kind of conversation are they having here in Quebec, and what kind of larger conversation are they having with those histories of abstraction and minimalism?
Yeah. I've always sort of positioned my practice more in the tradition of post-minimalism and process work that really has its roots in the 70s. A lot of artists who were doing actions or gestures that could be considered drawing, but really a lot of the sort of repeated gestures or movements or line making, let's say on grass or in snow or whatever in a surface, really had to do with the body. And I think that's a little bit less the case with my work. In terms of abstraction in Quebec, that's more of a difficult one. I was surprised to find that, yes, I relate to 𝙀𝙀𝙀𝙀 more than I thought I did. Well, I guess it's been a few years now since they've had the exhibition in Quebec of Joan Mitchell and 𝙀𝙀𝙀𝙀, and I had gone there thinking that I was really interested in Joan Mitchell's work, but it was actually the 𝙀𝙀𝙀𝙀 pieces that really I came away with as resonating with. Certainly pattern. I mean, also, he was an artist who did spend quite a bit of time in rural settings in Quebec, and you do see that coming out in his work in snow, or be it something else. Patterns, again, the influence of patterns, and nature makes patterns, and they aren't necessarily, sometimes they're regular patterns, but sometimes they aren't. Sunlight makes patterns. So yeah, I think that for me, in terms of Quebec abstraction, there is perhaps more of a link to the landscape than perhaps than perhaps some of the trends in terms of the philosophy behind making the work and so forth. So, Amber, I realized too, as I'm sort of wrapping up that question, I was going to say, with relation to your earlier question about responsibility and impact treading with a light practice, I was just going to get back to that for a minute, just to say, yeah, that's what it actually is about, is responsibility as well. That I feel like it is, like, in terms of what it is that we're setting out to do with our art practice, making sure that it's done responsibly. So in terms of environment, in terms of relationships to people, and that all aspects of what we're doing is something that isn't taking away too much from somebody else or from something else. So for me, that's I guess more broadly what I mean. And I just realized that I didn't answer the second half of that. So there you go.
That's great. And that's like a great way to circle back to that original point. If there aren't questions from the chat, I'll give like one or two more minutes for people to do so, but I'm curious if there's anything else that you think would be important for us to consider when thinking about your work. Like any final words, I guess.
I guess in terms of like a lot of it is about the surface of these drawings, which really don't come through so much in photos. Also the fragility. I mean, they're fairly large works, and as you stand in front of them, they do have a certain presence. So yeah, I guess a little bit of that. What is the relationship of our bodies? I guess a bit, which is a big question for those who work with abstract or non-representational drawing, or painting. But yeah, what is the relationship of our bodies to the pieces that are up in the gallery? So that's maybe something to leave for people who are visiting.
Yeah, I really encourage people to go see the work in person. I think that, like you said, Nikki, the materiality is very important, and the scale. And I've seen your work quite a bit, but never in person.
Okay.
And the scale changed the work significantly for me. So yeah, I really encourage people to go see it. It's up until the 24th at the McClure Gallery. And I also want to highlight that Nikki's very generously hosting an in-person art hive on the 18th, Saturday the 18th. And it is from 10:30 to 1. And if I understand correctly, there might be soldering involved.
There might be.
Okay.
To be determined.
Okay.
Yeah.
You can find more information on our website, and we'll also share it on Facebook as well for people watching. There is one question in the chat though. Does he use the words negative and fragile when describing this series? Was this a combination of both the environment, climate crisis and COVID, or one or more of the other? As COVID hopefully recedes, do you see your art changing, or will your environment concerns override the more positive horizons from the pandemic? It's from Heather McShane.
Thank you, Heather. Good question, really good question. I think that for me, I was really finding that concerns during the time of COVID were more, for me personally, more involved with the environmental. I guess I sort of see COVID as being one aspect of environmental issues. To a certain extent, it is also something else. I think that what is going to happen next with the practice, I think it will be more, I wouldn't necessarily say environment as such, but yeah, really the idea of where these ideas come from. I guess I'm more interested in exploring the questions of why I'm thinking about this and who else is as well, and talking about that, than actually making, I guess I see less urgency to make changes in my materials practice. I certainly wouldn't want to, I want to continue working materially as a studio artist, but yeah, with more of a consciousness of what I'm doing and what others are as well.
That's great, thank you. I guess if there aren't more questions, I'll just say thank you again, Nikki. Please visit the show. Show up to the art hive. It's free, it's open to the public. It's on the 18th. And then thank you to all of you for listening with us and participating and watching the video later. Have a great evening.
Thank you.